MCOM TV brings you your favorite cup at home. And here with the drink of the week is your host, Amanda Cirigliano.
My name is Amanda. So on this episode of Your Favorite Coffee at Home, I'm going to show you guys how to do pour over coffee. Because I know sometimes going to the super hipster coffee shops when you don't know all the names of the fancy types of brews or espressos or the fancy drinks can be a little bit intimidating. So instead of having to put on some like super tight skinny jeans and going to a show or going to a coffee shop, I'm going to teach you guys how you can make your coffee in your sweatpants at home. So a couple of things you need before you can start doing pour over coffee. The first thing is you're going to need this vase. They sell these anywhere really that you can buy coffee beans, like Target, Walmart, or whatever. If you don't have one of these, they also have little singular ones that just make one cup. It's really fancy, and it conveniently fits on top of this cup. Ooh, yeah. Also, there was one time I was desperate, and I actually took flowers out of a vase and did it in a vase with flowers. So you can do that too. You're going to need some water, so make sure you get your water going. I'm not a fan of microwaves because of radiation and everything, so I don't use microwaves. So if you just put your water in a teapot, microwave it, whatever you want, you're going to need coffee beans. So coffee beans smell great. I prefer a light to a medium roasted beans instead of dark roasted beans. And actually, light roasted beans have more caffeine in them compared to dark roasted. So if you're staying up late studying, trying to like grit your teeth through some nasty, bitter coffee that's actually not helping you, just get a nice, light roasted coffee and it'll help you. And then you're going to need to pick out your favorite coffee mug. And then this right here, you're going to need a bean blender. So the bean blender, I highly recommend you just go ahead and pay the upfront cost and invest in a good quality bean blender. I've bought some cheap ones before and the blade has dulled within like the first month or so. So invest in a pretty good bean grinder. It'll do you well. So yeah. Also, you're going to need some filters, just like these. They make super specialty filters if you want a special filter, but really just any type of filter that will fit in the top of your vase like this. These ones, I got these ones at Target. Yeah, it works great. So yeah. Also, so I wake up early in the morning. Like I wake up usually around 5 or 5:30 every morning, brew me some coffee, and read a book until about 6:30 or 7. So coffee is like my actual motivation to get out of bed in the morning. And so my favorite part of the day is picking out a mug. This is my favorite mug. I'm a photographer, and so it has a little camera on it. It's fun. And this is actually a pint-size coffee mug. So it'll get you going in the morning. And a fun fact, so the average American drinks roughly 200 milligrams of coffee a day, or caffeine a day. So that's about 2 cups of coffee, give or take. And so I drink about 2 pints of coffee before I go to class in the morning. So I'm beating most Americans. So yeah, also, before you start grinding your beans, I recommend you have some sort of scooper of sorts so your beans don't just start spilling everywhere, and then you have a big mess and you waste fancy, expensive beans. So these beans, like I said, are light roasted beans, and I have been like keeping a calendar of like my favorite types of beans, and my favorite beans are actually roasted in Canada. I don't know what it is about Canada, but they just have the best roasting beans factories there. So yeah, your water typically for this process, you're gonna want to have something with a spout. So even if it's like a pitcher, but yeah. So whenever we come back from the commercial break, I'm going to show you guys how to use all these different appliances to brew your favorite type of coffee at home.
Good morning. I made your favorite coffee.
That was so thoughtful of you.
And snapshot will be dumb not to use that.
Aww.
I love you.
My mom was so wrong about you. Also, don't forget the hashtag.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. So right before we went to commercial, I did a run through of all the appliances you're going to need to do pour over coffee, and just in case if you missed it. So the first thing you're going to need is some sort of vase that can hold your coffee in. If you don't have this type of vase, I one time used a flower vase and it worked great, just as long as it's something with like a thinner neck so your filter doesn't fall through. And if you don't want to buy a huge one, they have small little vases like this one that works with your individual cup of coffee, and it goes right on top, just like so. And then you're going to need some whole beans. Don't get ground beans. And then you're going to need a bean grinder. So the first step to this process is grinding the beans. So do about a cup. It depends on how many cups of coffee you're wanting to make. Typically for me in the mornings, I'm only making like for myself, and so I don't necessarily need to use a whole bunch. But I do need enough that'll fill up my pint coffee mug because that is my favorite. So now we're going to start grinding these beans. And when you're grinding your beans, you don't want to make them super thin like you would find them at a store. You kind of want to make them a little bit more coarse because it helps the water flow through them and gets flavor and whatnot. So Okay, perfect. So I have them at a perfect consistency. So now after you get your beans all good and going, now the next step is to just simply wet the filter. Because right now the filter is kind of fitting awkwardly in the vase. So once you wet the filter, it'll start to stick to the vase. And just prep the filter for pouring. Perfect. So then you're going to let the water drip through. And then put your beans in the filter, like so. Perfect. You know how I told you guys earlier that Americans consume like 200 milligrams of caffeine? Well, actually, the average person in Finland drinks 400 milligrams of caffeine. So they're taking home the gold medal of caffeine drinking. So maybe I'll move to Finland. I'll fit in there. Okay, so now what you're going to do is this next process is called blooming the beans. And so you're going to pour around the outside of the beans. And you want to get them wet, but you don't necessarily want to make them soaking wet. And they'll start to you'll see them bubbling and whatnot. It's going to start bubbling, and you're going to wait a little bit, about 30 seconds. I'm not a scientist, but there's some chemistry happening in there with the beans and the oxygen in the water. I don't know. All I know is that it tastes good. So you're going to let that happen for a little bit. Now the next process is you're going to just keep your beans wet the whole time, but you don't want to flood it because then it's just really bad and everything gets clogged and it won't taste good. So just keep pouring along the outside of the coffee. And once the beans start rising a lot, just set your thing down, check your Instagram, check your Facebook. Also, I read this article the other day from the Huffington Post, and it was talking about how coffee, if you drink like 3 to 5 cups of coffee a day, it actually can decrease your chances of getting type 2 diabetes. And it also, people between 18 and 40, it was cutting down premature deaths by 12% if you drink a lot of coffee. So coffee is literally saving lives every day. So drink a lot of coffee. So keep pouring your water. And typically the water will look a lot darker, but since our water was sitting out, it's not exactly warm. So it's really important that you make sure your water is really warm. So that you're just going to keep doing that process and wait for it to finish dripping. And then when it's done, grab your favorite coffee mug and it'll be good to go. So that's all we have for today. I hope you've learned something and I hope you enjoy your cup of coffee this morning.